All right, everybody. Happy Friday. We survived another week. I ended off yesterday, we were talking about the Spanish flu fiasco. And I was reading a quote from good old Bertrand Russell from his book, The Impact of Science on Society. He said, "I do not predict that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. War has hitherto been disappointing in this respect, but perhaps bacteriological war may prove more effective. If a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. The state of affairs might sound somewhat unpleasant, but what of that?" he asks. Really high-minded people are indifferent to happiness, especially other people's happiness. He said there are three ways of securing a society that should be stable as regards population. The first is that of birth control, the second that of infanticide or really destructive wars, and the third that of general misery except for a powerful minority. Unbelievable. What a sick psycho bastard. But this tells you the kind of mentality that they have. They don't blush about stuff like this. This is their agenda. And so when we see things like mass casualty producing epidemics, pandemics, like the Spanish flu or influenza, arising right at a time when eugenics was at its peak. Well, it's still at its peak, but I mean, it had really begun to peak at that stage. Had been around for, well, it's been around forever, but I mean, in its modern manifestation, it was really, had been kicked in for decades. J. Harvey Kellogg had been having yearly meetings with all of his elite buddies. It's no coincidence that you see a pandemic like this arising at that time. Interestingly, in 1900, Sierra Leone was formerly made a colony and the property of the British Crown. Sierra Leone, of course, is where this one area where this disease had arisen prominently. Britain's entire West African colonial enterprise was headquartered at Sierra Leone. This included a new traffic in coal and tin that had recently begun being exploited in the vast Nigerian territory. So how convenient this happened to be a major epicenter for the outbreak of this disease. During World War I, Sierra Leone became a key coaling station for the Allies. Do you suppose that there was a population control agenda at work in the spreading of the Spanish flu to this region to make the stealing of its resources flow more smoothly? Kill two birds with one stone. We can make it easier for our coal industry and also test out our new, biological warfare industry that we're creating. Anyway, here's yet another highly suspicious aspect of the 1918 pandemic, which Barry mentioned in his book I referred to yesterday. He wrote on August 3rd of 1918, a U.S. Navy intelligence officer received a telegram that he quickly stamped secret and confidential. Noting that his source was reliable, he reported, "I am confidently advised that the disease now epidemic throughout Switzerland is what is known as the Black Plague, although it is designated as Spanish sickness and grippe." So there you go. The thing was in full swing. Was the 1918 outbreak really the Black Plague? Notice what he called it. I am confidently advised that the disease now epidemic throughout Switzerland is what is known as the Black Plague. Now, isn't that interesting? What do we know about the Black Plague, ladies and gentlemen? I did a show on this a while back. I think it was on Oracle. How the Black Plague was orchestrated by our little tribal friends. Several admissions were made to that effect, telling how they did it, dumping it into wells of the Goyim. Anyway, in fact, I cite one here. In Friedberg, a Jew admitted that the motive behind the orchestration of this plague was, quote, because you Christians have destroyed so many Jews, and also because we too want to be lords, for you have lorded long enough. The last part of that reason is more like it. We Jews have been destroyed by you Christians. Are you shitting me? Anyway, further along this line, notice what the protocols of the learned elders of Zion states. But you yourselves perfectly well know that to produce the possibility of the expression of such wishes by all the nations, it is indispensable to trouble in all countries the people's relations with their governments. I read this yesterday. So as to utterly exhaust humanity with dissension, hatred, struggle, envy, even by the use of torture, by starvation, by inoculation of diseases, by want, so that the Goyim see no other issue than to take refuge in our complete sovereignty in money and in all else. Once again, there you go. They actually talk in the protocols. And keep in mind, when this document came forth publicly in 1905, eugenics had already been in full swing. But they're actually talking here once again, just as I read yesterday, about inoculation from diseases as being one of the means to inflict misery on society, not to alleviate disease and sickness, but to propagate it. Interestingly, Barry tells us that sometime around July of 1918, Simon Flexner was, quote, coincidentally away in Europe just as the second wave of influenza was rearing to a swell in America. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. You know, some people have asked me, well, gee, why would they unleash such a thing? Wouldn't that affect them? No. They always make sure they're out of harm's way. Just like when they orchestrate wars. Well, that would ruin their world, too. Why would they orchestrate wars? Because they're not around when the wars break out. They make sure they're out of the way. And after everything's all wiped off the map, then they come back to clean up house and scoop up all of the easily grabbable land and resources and anything else they can salvage. And the survivors they can now enslave. It's what they've always done. Anyway. Oh, my God. Let's look at Mr. Simon Flexner, the big fraud artist. He was a very prominent medical figure at the time. He not only had the financial connections to pull off something like the creation of the 1918 epidemic, but he also had the lack of scruples, of course. And as it turns out, he didn't even have proper medical training. Classic elite Jew swineism. Of course, in that era, having proper medical training wasn't a requirement for entering the profession anyway. But it turns out he did not have any formal training. A huckster through and through. Just like their little AMA that they created right from the word go. The AMA would give their stamp of approval for, certain foods, certain products. Never doing anything to test, these foods or products or anything, medical products. No, never tested them. If you paid the right amount of money, you'd get their approval. Anyway, in his book, John Barry wrote thusly about these low standards of the medical profession at that time. He said, in America, the titles of professor and doctor went to anyone who claimed them. That's it. Further on in the book, he described Dr. Simon Flexner as a man who quit school in the 6th grade, spent his youth in delinquency, completed a 2-year course of study at the Louisville College of Pharmacy in 1 year. Unreal. 1 year's worth of schooling only in pharmacy, and not in not in actual medical practice. And he put the studying medicine. He put in time studying medicine at night school. The school name was not given, but he mentioned that it was terrible. And anyway, that's it. That's the only training, the only experience that he had. Unbelievable. And yet, based on that, he was the authority at the time on, in medical matters. He wrote, him and his brother wrote the Flexner report that served as the standard around the country for medical policies. God damn it, man. Anyway, Barry further described him as, quote, making sudden, impossible leaps. Now, how do you suppose he was able to do that? With a little help from his friends, obviously. Barry further tells us that Flexner later went to work by invitation for William Welch at the Hopkins lab, a position which garnered him a professorship at the University of Pennsylvania and led to his ultimate post at the top of the Rockefeller Institute. Again, all you have to do is have the right connections, ladies and gentlemen, or be a part of the right tribe. That's the only connections you really need. But if you happen to not be part of the right tribe, but are a sellout piece of shit, you're going to go places. Doesn't matter what your credentials are. That's all the credentials you need. Barry quoted Flexner as having said this of himself, quote, I have never been educated in any branch of learning. There are great gaps in my knowledge. Holy shit. And yet he became an authority. Just like, how do you become, say, an unknown peanut farmer from Georgia? How do you go from that to becoming president? How do you become an unknown, nobody in Chicago and then find your way into the White House with a new name? How does that happen? How do you become a know-nothing, dry, drunk, ass-picking loser, whose father formerly was president, and now suddenly you're there, who can't say 2 words in a row without tripping over your own tongue, can't even ride your bicycle without slamming into somebody else, or eat a pretzel without having a friggin' conniption and whacking your head on the table, supposedly. How does that happen? No qualifications to even tie your own shoes straight, and yet you can become president. It's having the right shoe connections. That's it. That's all you need. You can be the dumbest of bumbling asses, and yet you will climb to the top of the ladder. Holy horseshit. And so here it was with this bastard, Mr. Flexner. After quoting that statement from Flexner, Barry went on to add his own comments. He said he, Flexner, had an edgy insecurity that never left him. The same was true of Einstein, of course, and for the same reason. He was a fraud artist, uneducated, didn't know what the hell he was talking about. All he did was plagiarize. Yeah, I did a show on him a while back on Oracle, how, he was challenged to debates. He never took up any scientist on the challenge. He wasn't familiar with the material that he was credited with. He simply copied from Poincaré. I'll never forget in college, I had a professor, and of course back then I didn't know anything about this, but I remember he just went on and on and on, lecturing one whole class about Einstein. What a genius he was. And most people, when they come up with a new idea, it really isn't new. It's based on things that previous people have said, and maybe they just put it together in a new way, But that wasn't the case with Einstein's theory of relativity. It was all unique, all genuinely unique. He didn't borrow from anybody. What a crock of shit. I wonder if he knew that, in fact, Einstein did borrow. I'm trying to think now what the hell his name was. Bothwell. Is that a Jew name? Anyway, regarding his own doctoring experience, Simon Flexner said, I never made a physical examination. I never heard a heart or lung sound. Can you friggin' believe that? He became, him and his brother in their writings, their Flexner report, became the standard across the country at that time. The medical standard. They set the pace for the whole medical profession. And yet he himself admitted he had no experience, no education, never heard the sound of a heart, of lungs, didn't put a stethoscope to anybody's chest. Son of a bitch. Such is the strong foundation upon which modern medicine and immunology is laid. Man, oh man. So what lies ahead? One shudders to think about it, but notice the following interesting statement that German virologist Dr. Stefan Lanka wrote. Academic medicine, said Stefan, academic medicine has been and is the most important pillar of support of all dictatorships and governments which do not want to submit to written law, to consultations, and to human rights, that is, to the democratically legitimized social contract. If we do not overcome this, we will all perish by this academic medicine. Yeah, they don't want to have to give account. They want you to follow their instructions simply because they say so. And that's how it is for the most part in the medical profession. And people just go right along with it. Nobody questions what their doctor says, thinking that, well, he's basically infallible. Again, it's not that all doctors are pieces of shit or that they're even ignorant. But I'll tell you a great many are, folks. They only know what was, what was taught to them in the goddamn Jew-printed textbooks. Their word is not final. Remember that. Anyway, now notice what author John Barry wrote, again, in his book, The Great Influenza. He said, the 1918 pandemic then provides a case study of the public health and government response to a major bioterrorism attack. Since September 11, 2001, most states have begun to develop plans, he said. But actual decisions will likely be up to elected officials. We can trust them, can't we? And ready to implement such as making sure healthcare workers are the first to get vaccinated. Yeah, kill them off first. Legislation has to be in place. Production facilities have to be ready. And the lack of a centralized system should not be tolerated. There was terror afoot in 1918, real terror. Holy shit. Centralization is the answer, he says. That's how you get terror, you lying fraud artist. You know, even though he did well to expose Flexner, he talked about what a fraud he was, no credentials, blah, 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 blah. His answer to the threat of pandemics is to place our trust in a centralized system that he's got to know has been the major means of spreading pandemics in the past. Holy shit, man. Anyway. So it must be concluded that the 1918 Spanish flu was the result of vaccinations. By 1905, the precedent was already set for forced vaccinations in this country, which compelled people to receive this death-delivering contagion in a syringe. For in that year, a man named Jacobson and his son sued the state of Massachusetts for requiring them to get a second smallpox vaccination or pay a $55 fine. Actually, I don't think Jacobson in this instance is a Jew name. It's spelled S-E-N, not S-O-N. So yeah, they sued Massachusetts for being forced to get this inoculation. Jacobson refused to comply with the vaccine or the fine, claiming that he and his son had a bad reaction to a previous smallpox vaccination and were afraid that they would be injured or die by the second one. Rightly so. Jacobson maintained that forcing him to be vaccinated was an assault upon his person, he said, and violated his constitutional rights. Absolutely. The Supreme Court rejected the evidence Jacobson presented to show that the smallpox vaccine can cause injury and death, and that doctors cannot distinguish between those who will be harmed and those who won't be harmed by the vaccination. Oh, great. So since they can't determine who will and will be, notice that's an admission that people do get harmed. But since they can't determine it, you don't have a case, so you need to get the vaccine. What should be said is, since they can't determine who will and won't get harmed, you shouldn't have to put your life at risk. No. Instead, he said, while admitting that it can cause harm, you have to go along with it. Holy Christ, man. You see what a screwball system we got here? Then that was back in 1905. Everything was thus in place for the mass carnage that would follow just 13 years later. It was most likely this vaccine, where who the hell knows how many millions of people were injected with these viruses that sat dormant in the system, incubating, which finally broke out later in 1918. Interestingly, World War I was the first war in which vaccination was compulsory for all servicemen. Son of a bitch. The Boston Herald later reported that 47 soldiers had been killed by vaccination in just 1 month. Also at this time, military hospitals were filled with sick victims of this vaccine, and it was required. The same thing happened during the 1870-71 Franco-Prussian War, where every German soldier was vaccinated. As a result, 53,288 otherwise healthy men developed smallpox and the death rate was very high. My God, man. Do you suppose this was all just an accident? Some people would say, oh, that was back then. Their methods were primitive back then. Jesus Christ. Then what's the excuse you have today when people die from goddamn vaccinations on a grand scale? All right, guys, short break. Right back. All right, folks, welcome back. So having said all that about the 1918 Spanish flu, shouldn't surprise us to discover that in more modern times, the same kind of bullshit has been going on a grand scale. Let's take a look at the swine flu. Same Fardigan thing. We're going to see the same pattern repeating itself. Surprise, surprise, surprise. You talk about a lot of fiascos that have gone on with inoculations. The Marisol fiasco of the mid to late 90s. Millions of kids received inoculations that were laden with this mercury, impregnated preservative, which caused a massive outbreak in autism diagnoses around the country. Autism went up 1,800% between 1995 and 2000, directly attributable to the Marisol. They only removed the Marisol from vaccines, they said, not because there was any real problem created by the Marisol, but because there was such an outcry of paranoia on the part of parents around the country. So, just to keep them happy, we removed it. No admission that the Marisol was the cause. And yet there they were injecting these kids with a deadly neurotoxin, known to be deadly for thousands of years, injecting it directly into their veins, not going through the body's filtration system. It would be bad enough if they gave them a cookie laden with this shit. At least it would go through their kidneys, their liver, filter out a lot of the harmful mercury. Nope, directly into their veins, so it would go directly into their brains. And then would all these cases of autism break out suddenly, corresponding with these inoculations? Oh, no, there's nothing wrong. These are the people you trust, America. You gullible goddamn fools. Most Americans, still to this day, in spite of all this shit that has happened, all the documentation that's out there to show the harmful effects of not only inoculations, pharmaceuticals across the board, in spite of all of it, you're paranoid. Oh, they might admit, oh, yeah, we know that there's risks, but, oh, come on, it's just oversight. They don't know that this is going to happen in advance. Why? What are you implying? You think they would do that to us? This is all they've ever done. It's their intent from the start. It's all part of their goddamn eugenics program. You can even show them eugenics documents. You can tell them that famous quote by Henry Kissinger. It doesn't matter. In one ear, right out the other. Anyway, back in 2009, the panic button was being pressed by both government officials and the mainstream media, warning that a global deadly outbreak of swine flu was underway, and that the only salvation from this scourge was to get immunized immediately. Remember that? Funny how people seem to forget. There was so much hype about this. This was the big thing in the news, and suddenly now it's all fizzled out. You don't hear any more talk about it. Where's the epidemic? Oh, I guess if you ask, they'd probably say, oh, well, enough people got immunized, so that's what saved us. Bullshit. Did you know anybody that caught swine flu? They would infect a few people, show them on the news, and suddenly, presto, that's supposed to get you in panic mode. Oh, my God, I better get to the clinic right away. Suddenly, the whole matter was dropped, and there was no epidemic or pandemic that broke out. What happened? Interestingly, it was at this same time, that the global warming manic panic hysteria, mysteriously subsided as well. Isn't that interesting? It was soon discovered that the fear-mongering of global warming is being due to human carbon emissions, and thus requiring a global carbon emissions tax was a complete fabrication by our friendly neighborhood Jewish supremacist pigs. I'll do a whole show on that sometime. What a goddamn fraud that was. They were caught with their pants down, actually sending memos back and forth, telling them to hype up the figures, fix the numbers, to make it look legit. Has there been some degree of what you could call global warming? Some indications of, recession of glaciers. Yeah, big fucking deal. It goes on all the time. It's gone on all through history. Mars's polar cap has been showing signs of recession. Do we got to impose people for a carbon emissions tax for that too? What a crock of shit. It's funny, though, because some areas are showing warming, other areas are showing cooling. And how much of that is even natural anyway, on this planet, with all the screwy weather patterns we're having? A lot of that, my dear friends, is created in Gakona, Alaska. But in any case, to pawn the blame off on people because of carbon emissions, are you frickin' kidding me? And do you really think these elite bastards that come up with this bullshit are going to be paying such a tax themselves? Do you think they pay any taxes? So, obviously one of the reasons they backed away from the swine flu bullshit was because the lid was blown off of their whole global warming thing. And they realized, oh, Christ, we better ease off of this thing. They're going to figure out we've been lying to them across the board about that and this and that and this and that and a whole bunch of other things. Complete fabrication, the whole swine flu. Let's look at the background of this first. The 2009 supposed outbreak, was first detected in Mexico on April 23rd, 2009. A few days later, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the CDC, Center for Disease Control. Oh, yeah, they want to control disease, all right. Make sure as many people as they can will get it. The CDC claimed that the so-called Mexican flu had inflicted more than 1,000, resulting in 60 deaths. They were probably disappointed. Shit, we thought it would kill more than that. The infectious agent was reported as a hybrid of pig, bird, and human flu viruses. Oh, I'm sure it was. In the lab. It included, they said, genetic elements from European and Asian swine viruses. Just like AIDS, it comes from the African green monkey. Yeah. By the monkeys working at the research lab there at the University of Louisiana, New Orleans, culturing, viruses on African green monkey livers. Anyway, the official name of the virus was influenza A, subtype H1N1. Influenza A. Is that interesting? Shortly after the 1918 epidemic, after it did its dirty work and, people either recovered from it or died from it, it died out. That virus was known to be extinct, and they frickin' revived it again. Oh, I don't know, I think it was back in the 90s. They sent a team up to the Arctic where some scientists, had died and were frozen in the, buried in the frozen tundra up there. And they exhumed their bodies And the virus was still alive, of course, in their frozen tissues, and they revived the damn thing. They still have vials of it tucked away in a lab. Why would you revive something like that, ladies and gentlemen, unless you were a sick son of a bitch that intended to unleash it? What they should have done was, exhume the corpses and burn them to make sure nobody else got to them and would attempt such a thing. But to have this done officially, I mean, does that not tell you what we're dealing with here? There's no reason to do that unless you're a sick, psychopathic bastard that intends to unleash this at some point on some sector of the population. It's the only reason you would do that. Anyway, most puzzling about this H1N1 virus was the fact that it had not been detected in pigs or pig farmers, interestingly enough. They're just, we're just told that's where it came from. If it ever came from a pig, folks, it was one particular pig that they worked on in a frickin' lab. But, they want you to think that this happened randomly out in the general pig population, get you paranoid. By May 9th of 2009, the World Health Organization. Who are you? Who? The good old boys at WHO. Now there's another respectable organization. By May 9th, 2009, WHO declared that up to 2 billion people could be infected worldwide if the alleged then current rate of spread had continued. Oh, wow. Talk about hitting the panic button. 2 billion. They just come up with a random figure they pulled out of a hat. Let's see now. We can't get, too obnoxious and can't say 5 billion. At the time, that was the whole world's population, or 5.5 billion. So we'll say 2 billion. It's still a significant number, and it's going to get a lot of people freaking out. 2 billion? Are you frickin' kidding me? At that point, 110 deaths had been reported, mostly from the U.S. and Mexico, or so they even claim. Don't even know if that's friggin' true. But 110 deaths, and suddenly now, it's going to be 2 billion. And it's going to happen probably in the next couple of days or so. Show up at your local clinic as fast as you can. Even at this stage of the game, scientists still couldn't even agree on whether or not they were dealing with a pandemic or an epidemic, or maybe they couldn't agree which one they wanted to make it appear to be. Who knows? But in any case, they were still working out the figures, and yet here they are. Here's WHO telling us, 2 billion. All, propaganda, all hype to get you to the clinic so they can make not only fat wads of cash off you, but inflict you with who the Christ knows what else viruses and diseases in the process. So, was this whole thing a natural outbreak, or was it man-made? To most people, to even suggest the possibility that something like this could be, deliberately created and unleashed on the public is absolutely unthinkable. Why, that's heresy. But again, it's just because people are totally clueless about the history of this crap and how this isn't anything new. This has gone on from day one. They don't understand who runs our world and what makes them tick. Jewish supremacist swine bags have had a long history of poisoning Gentiles as part of their Talmudic war on the Goyim. This is something, again, that they have long been involved in for thousands of years, not just hundreds, not just going back to the Dark Ages. In more modern times, they've been behind the, of course, eugenics movement we've been talking about. The mentality that drives this movement was, again, best summed up by Bertrand Russell. Quote I read a little while ago. I won't read it again here, but, you know, the one where he says, I do not predict that birth control is the only way in which population can be kept from increasing. He goes on to talk about, you know, pharmacological products, blah, blah, blah. But is this really how our Jew-controlled leaders operate? Are they really interested in creating and disseminating deadly viruses? Notice what the September 6th, 2003 edition of London's Guardian had to say. This is the famous quote of, you know, from the PNAC document there. You can't go to their website anymore. It's been taken down. Or, well, actually, I think somebody said it was put up recently again, but, you know, the September 2000 report itself is no longer available. They realize it got too much attention. Or maybe they wanted it to get attention, but now that it's taken down, they can always have plausible denial. But in any case, it doesn't matter. We have mainstream news agencies like this that have quoted from it. Their articles are still available. And here's what it said. We now know that a blueprint for the creation of a global Pax Americana was drawn up, entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, which was written in September 2000 by the neoconservative think tank Project for the New American Century. This blueprint, it said, hints that the U.S. may consider developing biological weapons. Hints? Are you freaking kidding me? Hints? It's amazing. You know, here they are reporting on this incredibly evil bullshit, and they got to say hints? Anyway. Hints that the U.S. may consider developing biological weapons, quote, that can target specific genotypes and may transform biological warfare from the realm of terror to a more politically useful tool. That all was a direct quote from the PNAC document. Brought to you by Rumsfeld, Cheney, Wolfowitz, Pearl, Feith, Abrams, Jeb Bush, probably the next rigged president in 2 more years. Christ almighty, man. If there is a God, may he help us. Can you believe this crap? These bastards, these self-imposed heroes, saviors from terrorism, actually discussing right out in the open using chemical and biological warfare for a politically useful tool to transfer it from the realm of terrorism. These are the ones that most dumbass Americans think are fighting terrorism on our behalf, fighting to protect us from chemical and biological weapons of mass destruction. That's the whole phony reason they gave for taking out Saddam, right? And yet here they are. Here they were long before this bastard was even in office through the first rigged election that put him there, talking about using WMDs themselves for politically useful tools. It's fucking amazing, man. And again, people will say, oh, you're one of those conspiracy nuts. No, you're one of those mindless, dumbass nuts who don't know what the hell's going on in this friggin' world. Stupid asses. Anyway, back to our question. Was the swine flu natural or man-made? To help answer this question, check this out. On April 29th, Indonesian Health Minister Siti Fadila Supari, who had previously accused Western governments of making and spreading viruses, to boost pharmaceutical products, had this to say: I'm not sure whether the virus was genetically engineered, but it's a possibility. There you go. Of course it's a possibility. But, when you have official statements like that being made, Indonesian health minister, notice I'm sure he knew it was man-made. But when you're in a prestigious position like that, you can't commit yourself totally. You can just drop little hints, like you suspect there's a possibility, And then he can always have an out later if he gets attacked too much and starts to lose his credibility, you know. Well, I just said it's a possibility. I didn't say it was. Actually, that's what I had to do when I got caught, you know, talking about the Trinity on campus. My mind pretty much was already made up. I just wanted to get, you know, that other theology major's opinion on it. But, you know, I had researched it enough. I was only in the early stages. There was still a lot more research to do. But, I mean, I had researched it enough to realize, yeah, this thing's a fraud, you know. But when I got caught, all right, well, got caught like I was doing something wrong. You know what I'm saying? When my report was turned in to the head of the theology department, you know, to save face, I said, well, I never, and it's true, in my report, I didn't state that this was my conviction, not as yet. I was just asking questions. And so that's what I had to say. You know, well, I'm just asking questions. You know, I'm just trying to get answers, and you're telling me to keep quiet? Aren't I here to learn? You know, I was playing a little game with them. They were playing a game with me. Why not play a game back with them? But, you know, this is often what you have to do. You know, if your career is being threatened, if you're being made out to look like a crackpot, you got to throw stuff out like that, or in fact, you will be out on the street. Then you won't have any ability to affect any change at all, you know, from within. So you can't blame this guy for saying that. It's obvious he was convinced it was, in fact, man-made, but all you can do is throw questions out. Oh, there's a possibility. It looks like it could be. Ah, what a friggin' screwed up world we live in. People just can't come out and say the truth. They can't come out and say what's on their mind. They can't even express an opinion that is contrary. They can only do it in the form of a question. Maybe, possibly. And even then you can get attacked for that. But at least, you know, you can probably face save. Like George Carlin, you know, he had an ingenious way of getting the truth out. He did it under the guise of comedy. So he had an out. Anybody who attacked him, and he was attacked, but he could just say, oh, well, it's just comedy. I'm just making a joke. That's how he got away with it for so long. Just comedy. But his listeners knew exactly what he was saying was true. You know. But to outsiders looking in, you know, unfortunately, they never, a good many of them didn't get it. Outside of his circle of fans that knew what the hell was going on, you know. They would hear that and think, oh, these silly comedians, you know, always got to poke fun of stuff. But nevertheless, though, he did reach a lot of people that weren't aware. You know, they would start to listen to him. Geez, you know, he's telling some jokes here, but a lot of that stuff actually makes sense. And so he did get a lot of people thinking at the same time. It's just sad, though, that you have to reach people that way. I've had many people tell me who have heard my show, you know, you meet up with them here and there, you know, and so they would listen and come back and, oh, you're too harsh. You got to temper things down. Ah, bullshit. Like I said, shock talk. When you've got an apathetic public that's in a friggin' coma, you have to use shock talk to snap them out of their apathy. You've got to. And if it frightens them away, well, then screw them. They're not the kind of people you want on your side anyway. Seriously. If they're scared away from you know, abrasive language, they're a bunch of pussies to begin with. Or they're a bunch of Bible-thumping fools who think that crass language somehow is going to send them to hell. Oh, knock it off. Knock it off. Following your religious leaders is going to send you to hell. How does that grab you? Bunch of crap. Don't get me wrong, you know, I try not to swear in front of kids, or, you know, and stuff like that. But adults? Are you kidding? Knock it off. Anyway, 2 weeks later, Adrian Gibbs, an Australian voluntary virologist with impeccable academic credentials, shocked the scientific world by suggesting that the new strain of swine flu was indeed created in the laboratory using eggs to grow viruses for vaccines and could have been accidentally leaked to the general public. See, once again, here's that same face-saving out that you got to use when you figure out what's going on. You want to let the public know. You got to temper it down. So, he's admitting, it's clear it was man-made, but it was an accident. Just like a lot of people who know that, goddamn Lyme disease was created by Plum Island, the Plum Island facility. It's obvious that's where it came from. Government documents show they were researching dissemination of biological frickin' warfare through ticks. So they'll say, it was just released by accident. Anyway, it's just, again, it's unfortunately what you have to do if you want to keep your job. But at least he did come out and say that anyway. Gibbs, who was on the team behind the development of Tamiflu, came to this conclusion by analyzing the genetic blueprint of the virus. Not surprisingly, WHO and the CDC were quick to note that there was no evidence for this assertion. He had just done a major scientific study, an expert in his field, and then these bastards, probably most of which themselves don't have any fucking credentials, they're spokespeople anyway, come out and say, there's no evidence. And that's it, case closed. And that's how it works for most people. Officialdom makes a statement like that, even though there are credentialed scientists. All right, folks, welcome back. Anyway, even Dr. Leonard Horowitz, who, although Jewish, at least claims to be against the Zionist state of Israel, so-called, supposedly, stated that he suspected that swine flu was part of, quote, a conspiracy to commit genocide by an Anglo-American network of government and pharmaceutical company genetic engineers who produced genetically modified recombinants of the avian, swine, and Spanish flu viruses, H5N1 and H1N1, nearly identical to the unprecedented Mexican virus that has now spread to the United States. So, even he made that admission. Actually, Horowitz isn't, he doesn't claim to be against the state of Israel. No, he's a rabid Zionist, if I remember right. Anyway. Notice how he naturally diverts attention. Some might, applaud him for making this admission, but he diverts attention away from the real perpetrators, of course, his fellow tribesmen. Makes it out to be, the government or government scientists. It vaguely lays blame on Anglo-American governments and pharmaceutical companies. They love to blame Goyim for what they do. Anyway, nevertheless, this statement by Horowitz at least points out the human element, which most other commentators in the medical profession have always laughed at. But, anytime you get an admission by a tribe member like this, it's always going to point a finger at Anglo-Americans or Anglo-Saxons, white people, instead of their own sleazy-ass selves. Here's another confession along this line. According to an unnamed source known to former NSA official Wayne Madsen, quote, a top scientist for the United Nations who has examined the outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus in Africa as well as HIV/AIDS victims, concluded that H1N1 possesses certain transmission vectors that suggest that the new flu strain has been genetically manufactured as a military biological warfare weapon. There you go. There you go. That's why the thing suddenly disappeared. The whole threat, just vanished into thin air. No more talk about it. Madsen claimed that his source, along with another in Indonesia, was convinced that the current outbreak of a new strain of swine flu in Mexico and some parts of the United States is the result of the introduction of a human-engineered pathogenesis that could result in a widespread global pandemic with potentially catastrophic consequences for domestic and international travel and commerce. I think of the SARS outbreak. My God, the perfect timing for that. It was right after friggin' 9/11, when the Asian economy was swinging way ahead of the West. They had to do something to level it off. So they introduced SARS and, this big panic. It did bring, the Asian economy down quite a few pegs to level it off on a par with ours that was, faltering at the time. But then suddenly that thing disappeared. Remember that? Wow, what happened? It was a big outbreak. It was major. The implications were going to be far-reaching. It was going to spread far and wide. Suddenly that whole thing fizzled out too. When are people going to figure this out, man? Anyway. So, these fiascos they pull, as always, have multiple purposes. It's not just to reduce the population. Eugenics is always a part of it, but there's always other little benefits, side fringe benefits to gain from this. Economic chaos, bringing nations, to their knees. And again, that was the case with the SARS outbreak. Level off, economies so that, they could even things out. Let's look at another link in a long chain like this. The swine flu fiasco of 2009 was only, again, another link, a long chain of scams of this nature. AIDS, of course, is yet another man-made virus. Just look at what Dr. Donald M. MacArthur, Deputy Director, Research and Engineering, Department of Defense, said before Congress on June 9th, 1969. This is a famous quote. Within the next 5 to 10 years, he said, it would probably be possible to make a new infective microorganism which could differ in certain important aspects from any known disease-causing organisms. Most important of these is that it might be refractory or resistant to the immunological and therapeutic processes upon which we depend to maintain our relative freedom from infectious disease. In other words, he was talking about the creation of a virus that would do the very thing that the AIDS virus did in the time frame he said it would be developed, 5 to 10 years later. About 10 years later, 1980, actually 11 years later, is when the first cases of AIDS started to be diagnosed. Another statement of this nature was made in the 1972 Bulletin of the United Nations World Health Organization, WHO, once again, volume 47, page 251. It stated, an attempt should be made to see if viruses can in fact exert selective effects on immune function. The possibility should be looked into that the immune response to the virus itself may be impaired if the inflicting virus damages more or less selectively the cell responding to the virus. WHO, that pawns itself off as being a human rights advocacy organization designed to oversee and protect the health of citizens around the world. Oh, it brings your eyes to tears to think about it, doesn't it? Here they are talking about research and development of the very type of virus that was mentioned in the previous quote. MacArthur there was speaking before Congress, Donald MacArthur. The very same type of virus. Here's WHO talking about it. Unbelievable, man. They're all in on it, ladies and gentlemen. It's all one happy little conspiracy. Yes, I know most Americans don't like to use that word. Maybe they're afraid of it. They know what's going on and don't want to hear it. That's probably what it is. They know there's a goddamn conspiracy afoot. It's in your face everywhere you look. Then there was the fiasco of 2006 when it was revealed that Bayer Corporation, upon discovering that their injection drug for hemophiliacs was contaminated with the HIV virus, all by accident, of course, decided to take it off the U.S. market, but only to dump it on the European, Asian, and Latin American markets instead. Remember that one? No Bayer officials were ever arrested or prosecuted for this atrocity. And as it turns out, the FDA was discovered to have collected or to have colluded with Bayer in covering up this scandal in the U.S. and assisting in the company selling their contaminated product outside the U.S. They were actually helping them to get rid of it, to sell it off. Instead of destroying it, no, we don't want you to lose any profits off of this. And it can still be used to help reduce the population, so we'll help you take it off the U.S. market and put it in other markets abroad. But, of course, there's been many other obvious man-made killer diseases that have arisen in recent decades, such as, I mentioned SARS, Ebola, Legionnaire's disease, of course, Lyme disease, hepatitis C, West Nile virus, mad cow disease, and on and on and on and on and on and on and on. People are supposed to believe that these things just arise in a vacuum out of nowhere. Careful examination of the history of these diseases reveals the ugly truth of human engineering once again. But aside from all the evidence that has emerged to show that these diseases were, in fact, created by human hands, it baffles the mind as to how anyone could think otherwise when we consider that, these diseases have all arisen at a time when biological warfare research and development is at an all-time friggin' high. Nobody can deny that. Official records tell you that right in your face. But it's just a coincidence that all of these complicated viruses are emerging while this research, again, is at an all-time high. Put it together, will you? We have a government that participates and covers up for false flags attacks such as 9/11, the Oklahoma City bombing, the USS Liberty attack, et cetera, and a government that experiments on its own people, such as, when it gave syphilis to blacks at the Tunguski Institute, and, doused patients with radioactive substances in hospitals around the country from the 50s to the 1970s, just to see what the effects would be. We've got all this crap that goes on, fully documented, and yet, no, they wouldn't poison our vaccines, and they wouldn't approve of toxins in our medications. Well, all medications are toxins, but they wouldn't assist companies caught with their pants down, with tainted pharmaceutical products, and then help them sell them overseas when they're caught here doing it. No, that wouldn't happen. It's kind of like, after the government admitted that it lied about the weapons of mass destruction. It's been admitted. Paul Wolfowitz, for Christ's sakes, admitted it. Even though it's known we were lied into a friggin' war that has cost, untold thousands of American lives. Forget the official number they've given you. It's always much higher than that. Not to mention, God knows how many hundreds of thousands, millions, take your pick, overseas. Nobody can deny the reality that we were lied into that war. And yet, when you say that the government orchestrated 9/11 so that they could have a phony pretext to stage such wars like that in the first place, oh, they wouldn't do that. Did you ever hear that? Oh, that's friggin' amazing, man. They just get done admitting. I know a woman that, she thinks I'm crazy with my political rants about conspiracies. And no, the government wouldn't do that. One day, I was talking to a group of people. She was sitting there. And, I was talking about the Cold War being a fraud and how we've been lied into so many wars, for big corporate interests. And she's nodding her head in agreement. I says, wait a minute. You're agreeing that our government lies us into wars? Oh, yeah, I know. That goes on all the time. And yet she denies things like 9/11. Jesus Christ. I don't know. I just don't get it. What's with this disconnect? If you can admit that your government has committed crimes, A through X, why not Y and Z, goddammit? If they have the psychopathic mentality to commit all those other crimes, what the hell makes you think they wouldn't resort to it? I don't friggin' get it. If they can lie us into a war that would cause the death of far more people, far more Americans than what died on 9/11, why the frig not 9/11 itself? Why is it different, for a war? Oh, because they died overseas? Does that make it acceptable? You can admit that they would, create a phony war that caused Americans to die overseas, but they wouldn't stage a phony false flag attack over here that would cause Americans to die over here. Is that it? Or maybe they can come to terms with it by saying that, those Americans, yes, we were lied into that war, and those Americans did die, but they died at the hand of a foreign power, which, of course, is a lot of bullshit, too, because a lot of that is friendly fire crap. Or a lot of the deaths result from the inoculations they give our frickin' soldiers. But nevertheless, that's probably what goes on in their mind. Well, they were killed by foreign soldiers. Well, our government wouldn't kill people directly over here, though. What the hell does it frickin' matter anyway? Even if that were true, they died at the hand of foreign soldiers and they wouldn't kill people directly. They still lied our soldiers into a war that resulted in their deaths. That makes them just as culpable as the foreign soldiers who shot our soldiers and killed them. It still makes them culpable, you gullible dumbasses. How the hell can you possibly exonerate a government that would do something like that? How could you possibly think they're not capable of other evil acts when they've committed that evil act? Do you see the disconnect here? The cognitive dissonance that's at play here. It's mind-blowing. Get over it. This is how it works. This is how it's always worked, all through history. When you get Jewish supremacists hijacking your government, it's always going to be a piece of shit. You're never going to be able to trust it. It's always going to be out to get you. That's not a paranoid statement. It's a friggin' fact. Get over it. Snap out of it. The more people remain in an apathy about this stuff, the more screwed we are. The worse things are going to get. That's just where they want you to be. In denial, hide your head in the sand, play make-believe, no, it's not happening, so they can continue to get away with it time and time and time again. And they have been. And if you're a dumb enough ass to deny that this is going on, you are actually culpable in it. You're actively engaging in helping to facilitate crimes like this by turning your eyes away. You're giving them approval for doing this. We have a government that has continually lied to us in war after war, lied us into the wars, lied to us about the wars, why they happened. A government that is, constantly picks our pockets illegitimately through the extortion racket known as the friggin' IRS to pay back usury to the fraudulent Federal Reserve friggin' bitch banking system run by Jewish supremacist pigs. And yet people want to say, no, that doesn't happen. No, they wouldn't do this. They wouldn't do that. Sandy Hook, oh my God, how could you say such a thing? Do you really, really think creating and releasing the swine flu virus is out of the realm of possibility of our elite Jew pig-controlled government when they're doing all these other things on a daily frickin' basis, when they help to facilitate the goddamn, fiasco that led to the bailout? When Goldman Sachs pushed to get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, you don't think they saw this coming, that they knew that this was going to result? And when it did result, you don't think that they knew that they were behind it? And then turned around and rewarded them by giving them all the freaking bailout money? And then they saw how they were rewarding themselves with billions of dollars, the CEOs, of these companies, rewarding themselves with billions of dollars in bonuses from the bailout money. And yet the government sits back idle and does nothing about it. You don't think they're fully in league with them? For Christ's sakes, are you fucking daft? I'm not speaking to my listening audience, just the American public in general. Is your head really that far up your ass? My God, it's amazing. Anyway. Two months before the first appearance of the 2009 swine flu outbreak, a Czech lab worker who was conducting a flu experiment was stunned when all of the ferrets that she was working with had suddenly died from inoculation of experimental virus material composed of human seasonal H3N2 flu virus. Ferrets are not supposed to die from exposure to human seasonal flu viruses. The lethal biological product that these ferrets were injected with was produced by Illinois-based Baxter International at its plant in Donau, Austria, and was then distributed to labs in Germany, Slovenia, and the Czech Republic. Testing later showed that the experimental virus material was indeed a mix of human H3N2 seasonal flu viruses, but that it was contaminated with unlabeled live bird flu H5N1 viruses, one of the most deadly biological weapons, with a 60% kill rate. Many were suspicious of this contamination, which is supposed to never, ever happen. It could, in fact, have led to a major epidemic with massive loss of human life. Was it done on purpose? People, again, will hear about this and say, oh, that's terrible. What a terrible accident. Are you friggin' serious? You really think this was an accident? Again, might be Lyme disease bullshit, How many times does this stuff have to go on before people finally realize, we can't trust these sick bastards in power? Here we are letting billions of our tax dollars go to research and development for this stuff, and all that comes out of it is the creation and dissemination of new diseases. That's all we're getting. Look at the donations, never mind your tax dollars. Look at the donations that people make for things like, cancer research. What the hell has come out of that? Decades and decades and decades on end. What, what could you point to say that even one step forward has been made? Or even the hint of a step forward? Nothing. Not a goddamn thing has come out of this, folks. Nothing. And yet people still continue to donate year after year after year. All we see is new diseases, major ones, being unleashed on the public. And, every time you get scientists, certain ones, saying that, this thing is a very complex strand. It looks like it could have been made in a lab. In fact, I don't see how it could have come about by natural processes. And then you keep hearing of the government pumping billions of tax dollars into research, into chemical and biological warfare. What the hell else? If it smells like shit, tastes like shit, feels like shit, chances are it's shit. But no, most Americans are still oblivious, still in la-la land. What is it going to take? Anyway, so, all you can conclude is if you're dumb enough not to see this as a conspiracy, you at least have to conclude that what we're dealing with here, on the part of Baxter International is outrageous and scandalous incompetence. In either case, there should have been an investigation, if not a criminal investigation, at least an investigation to determine who was behind this, who was the incompetent idiot that was overseeing this, that allowed this to happen, and make sure the bastard is removed from his job and never works in that field again. Measures have got to be taken. Nothing gets done. What does that tell you? At best, what you can conclude from that is that you have a government that doesn't give a shit. That's the best you can say. But of course, it's much worse than that. You have a government that wants this shit to go on, that doesn't just turn the blind eyes and help facilitate it. Like I said before the break, folks, Baxter was never disciplined at all. No measures were taken to make sure that a massive, if you're going to assume this was incompetence, and that's certainly what they want you to assume, nothing was done. Notice, just like 9/11, nobody was disciplined, nobody was fired. The massive, if you're a dumbass that doesn't believe that this was staged by the government, you have to at least realize that major incompetence was afoot here. When you have, none of the towers should have been hit if protocol was followed. It only takes 5 minutes for an intercept and or shoot down anywhere over North American airspace. And yet 25 minutes transpired from the time that, according to the official story, from the time that flights 11 and 75 took off, 175 took off. 25 minutes went by. 5 times the amount of time that's required for an interceptor shoot down. 5 times the amount transpired. It was known these planes were hijacked 5 minutes after they took off. So, all right, minus that 5 minutes. That's still 20 minutes. So 4 times the amount of time that was required for an intercept. In any case, massive incompetence there. But as if that isn't bad enough, after the 2 towers were hit, for the next 40 minutes, a third plane, known to have been hijacked within 5 minutes after it took off, for the next 40 minutes after it was known that plane was hijacked, that plane was allowed to fly around without anything being done to stop it. Can you imagine the scale of incompetence you're dealing with here if you think things played out the way that we were told and that, there wasn't government complicity in this? You still have to at least conclude that this was a major breakdown in across the board on the part of NORAD, the military, ground control. Everybody was fucking asleep that morning. Why wasn't anybody fired, reprimanded, disciplined, punished, locked in friggin' jail, whatever? Nothing was done. And so it was here with Baxter. Baxter wasn't slapped in the ass. Nobody got fired. Nobody got disciplined. Nobody got punished. Nothing. On the contrary, just as was the case with 9/11, Bush actually rewarded the son of a bitches who were in charge the morning of 9/11. They got promotions, advancements. They were given medals. They were declared heroes. When this massive, the least you can say, incompetence was afoot here. Of course, it wasn't incompetence. They were told to stand down, and that's why they were rewarded. They did perform their jobs admirably as commanded. They weren't supposed to do anything. And so it is here with Baxter. Instead of, far from getting disciplined, they were rewarded. Listen to this bullshit. Not long after this whole thing blew open, just a couple of months after this fiasco, it was announced that Baxter was going to be collaborating with WHO in developing a vaccine against the swine flu. Oh, great job. Yes, we can trust you now to help us develop this swine flu vaccine that will create a pandemic that will make people sick. A lot of people did get that goddamn swine flu vaccine, too. You wonder what the hell is brewing with that. We won't know probably for several more years or maybe another decade or two. But those friggin' viruses are sitting right now dormant. And over time, just like the polio vaccine back in the 50s, didn't manifest itself until about 30 years later. In the early 80s, the kids that had received the vaccines in the early 50s, now in the early 80s as adults, they're developing deadly cancer tumors. That one took 30 years to manifest itself. So no telling what the swine flu is going to do in coming years. Not as many people got the vaccine as they had hoped, of course. The propaganda campaign didn't work quite so well for them as they had hoped, but nevertheless, there were untold thousands, tens of thousands, who knows. Yeah, I can remember they were talking about, you can even get it for free. That's how desperate they were. Well, shit, we wanted to make a big killer profit off of this, but even if we don't, even if we don't make that anticipated profit, we at least want to get people injected with this shit. In coming years, folks, there's going to be an outbreak of people getting sick. They're going to have similar symptoms all over the country. Nobody's going to friggin' connect it with the swine flu virus. No one's ever going to figure it out. They'll know exactly what it is, of course, but they'll never tell you. And because people are in a coma, have their heads up their ass, they're never going to put two and two together, especially where several years goes by. People can barely pay attention to things going on right in front of them at any given moment. But when years are involved, years of time go by, forget it. People will never make the connection. Just like they never made the connection with the cancer-inducing virus in the polio vaccine. Even though this is all documented now, this has all come out years later. It doesn't matter. People aren't going to pay attention. It's freaking astonishing. Just like the Cold War, it's all out there. It's no secret that the whole goddamn thing was staged. We were lied into war after endless war. None of them were legitimate. Didn't have the constitutionally required congressional declaration of war for any of those military incursions. And with all this history behind us, fully documented, unquestionable, fraud, America still allows itself to be lied into yet more wars. And you know what? They'll be lied into many more to come, too, you can bet. And all for Israel. Well, there's no doubt that releasing an epidemic would certainly be in keeping with the modus operandi of our Jewish supremacist-controlled government. Was this really the agenda of the swine flu scare of 2009, or was it merely a dry run? Or was that incident specifically just for the purpose of generating fat wads of cash in inoculation sales? Or was it a combination of these? I venture to say that's the case. There's always multiple benefits for every fiasco that they pull. Regardless, there's no doubt that a lot of unwarranted fear-mongering was going on at the time, no matter how you look at it, no matter what you think the agenda was. Former U.S. State Department insider Fred Burks, writing at the time for Op-Ed News, for the Op-Ed News website, had this to say: how much of the swine flu scare is real and how much is fear-mongering, he says. Can it be that certain members of the power elite profit handsomely when fear is spread about the globe through exaggerated alerts such as the avian flu and swine flu scares? Exaggerated alerts, absolutely. Could there actually be deadly man-made viruses which, if released, could cause a true pandemic killing millions around the globe? These are important questions worth exploring. Not my method. I would just come out and say that that's exactly what it is. But, when you're dealing again with a dumbed-down public who, has to have a pillow propped under their head and have the little blankie put over them and have their oatmeal warmed up and have some milk put in it before they can eat it, snap out of it. Burks went on to mention the so-called swine flu outbreak in 1976, which resulted in only one death, so we're told. And yet, fear-mongering by the government resulted in massive amounts of vaccinations being given out, which not only generated enormous profits for pharmaceutical companies, but actually caused 30 additional deaths through contaminated vaccines, contaminated on purpose, of course. A friend of mine actually lost his grandmother at that time. He was telling me a few months back. She was one of the ones that got the the vaccine and got really sick right thereafter and died. Oh, I'm sure there was no connection. Just like the thimerosal, no connection with autism going up 1,800% at the exact time that thimerosal was being put into the the inoculations. Nope. No connection. Anyway, within days of the announcement of the outbreak of swine flu in 2009, companies like GlaxoSmithKline, Gilead Sciences Inc., Roche, and others began seeing a sharp rise in their shares. Unbelievable. Oh, sickening. And that's all it was. But should it be a surprise when you realize that the bastards who run these goddamn pharmaceutical companies are the same ones who run the media? One Jew group scratching the back of another Jew group as they all laugh on the way to the bank. Oh, how could that ever work? There's all these, government agencies in place to prevent stuff like this. Yes, and they're all controlled by the same tribe, you mindless numbskulls. How could they ever pull something like that off? How could they not pull it off when they're frickin' controlling everything? They got their hands on every goddamn lever. How could they ever pull it off? That's the first question people ask me when I talk about stuff like this. How could they ever do that? How could they get away with it? Ha ha ha! Are you kidding me? London's Financial Times reported on May 12, 2009, that governments around the world had stockpiled 220 million doses of Tamiflu in preparation for a swine flu pandemic. They already had it ready to go. Already had it ready to go, ladies and gentlemen, ahead of time. The cost of this preparation was $7 billion, which you paid for. You and, other suckers in other countries around the world. We always pay for this bullshit so they can turn around and make huge profits off of us again when we pay for these vaccines that we've already paid for. Holy friggin' shit. Tamiflu, by the way, was found to be essentially ineffective, surprise, surprise, against bird flu, and yet there they were pushing it for swine flu. And just like the bird flu pandemic, the swine flu pandemic, of course, never materialized. Just selling us one piece of bullshit after another. But it sure made them whole lots of fat wads of cash, though. What a frickin' scam, man. They never became pandemics, obviously, because they clearly backed away, realizing that the public, to a large degree, wasn't buying the fear-mongering. There weren't that many people. A lot of people did, but, overall, there weren't that many. Not anywhere near as many as they had hoped. So remember they were telling you to go get the shot, and then when not many people were getting the shot, they were saying, well, you can get it free now. First they were charging, and then they said, oh, you can get it free, supposedly because they're just so concerned. They want to make sure everybody gets the shot. No, they wanted to make as much money off it as they could, but realizing that it wasn't catching on, okay, well, we'll give it free to you then, because they still wanted you to get it. Why? Because they're injecting you with who the frig knows what kind of toxic viruses that won't manifest themselves for years to come. Of course, another reason for the scare was to condition the public into accepting, at least somewhere down the line, the notion of mandatory forced vaccinations, all for the public's good, of course. We're pretty much at that point now. I mean, a lot of places, they won't hire you. You can't go to school unless your vaccinations are up to date. What a friggin' scam. All intimidation, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, I'll never forget. I've told this story before back on Oracle. Back when I was in college, you had to go to the nurse's office and get her to sign off for you before you could register for your classes. This is the day before classes are going to be starting. I was late registering because, well, it's a long story. I won't even go into it now. But anyway, it was out of my control. I wasn't able to register on time. So here I was, this is like my junior year now. So I wanted to hurry up and get registered so I was ready to go for the next day. So I'm in the nurse's office, and she's looking at my records, and she's like, oh, no, I'm sorry, I can't sign this. You have several shots that are outdated here. You have to go get those and then come back. Or if you want, I think that it was stuff she had right there. If you want, I can do it for you right now. But in either case, blah, 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 I'm not going to sign you up. I said, oh, I don't believe in inoculation. Sorry, but I'm still coming to school here, so I need your signature. Oh, no, like I said, I can't give you that. You have to get your records up to date. I said, so you're telling me I have to get injected with potentially harmful substances, or you're not going to sign off for me? Yeah, that's right. I says, well, you know what? That's not only illegal, but it's not going to work. I'm going to be right back in 5 or 10 minutes, and you're going to be signing this. She's looking at me laughing, saying, what makes you think I'm going to sign it? What are you going to do in 5 or 10 minutes that's going to change my mind? I said, you watch. I had a feeling this was going to happen. So I already had it set up ahead of time. I had written a note, exonerating the school from any blame, that I took full responsibility for not, getting immunized. And I took it right up to the president's office, president of the college. He was in a meeting at the time. And, I was supposed to wait out in the hall. But nope, I wasn't going to wait. Bullshit. I barged right in. Oh, excuse me, I'm having a meeting. I says, well, unless you want to be one student less. I knew they were really hurting for money at the time. They didn't want to lose any students. unless you want to be minus one student, you need to address this, immediately. So he comes up, oh, what's the matter? What's the matter? I explained the story. I only got halfway through it. He stops me and says, oh, no problem. Don't worry. I know about this. I've confronted this problem before. I know where you're coming from, and I don't blame you, he said. He was actually a pretty decent guy. When I went through my trouble with the Trinity, he offered me, sympathy, and he actually said, I wish there was something I could do on your behalf, but he said, there's those, above me that I have to answer to who would not back me up. There's unfortunately nothing I can do. But he says, you're perfectly free if you want to disseminate your findings off of campus. He said, you can stand out on the sidewalk right in front of the college and catch students as they're coming in and going out. He actually said that. And hand out your research if you want, but you can't do it on campus, That was interesting that he even said that. But anyway, so he signed the paper. Sure enough, I go down to the nurse's office. I hand it to her. Oh, did her tune ever change? Now she's all smiles. Oh, okay, no problem. And she signs me off. You see, folks, it's bullshit. It's friggin' horseshit when they tell you, oh, no, you can't go to school here. You can't get a job here. It's bullshit. It's a little intimidation game. Unfortunately, though, unless you can afford a lawyer and sue their friggin' sorry asses, you probably won't get into that school or get that job unless they're desperate. If you've got a lot of credentials and they really need you, they will forget about the inoculation bullshit. Or if they're a school that's hurting for funds, they're desperate for you to go. I had that in my favor. I knew that they were desperate, that they were in debt and they'd been in need for money coming in. So that's how I got away with it. If they weren't desperate, if they were filled to capacity and couldn't accept any more students, or maybe they could accept a few more, but really weren't hurting because they knew they would meet their budget, that wouldn't work. What a frickin' scam, man. This whole goddamn arrangement is so vomit-inducingly disgusting. But that's all it is. It's an intimidation game. It's not law. It's only their policy. They don't want any backlashings from El Governmente, so they pressure students hoping that they'll cave. And as long as I wrote that disclaimer note, that they copied it. They made sure they had it in their possession. So that if the state ever came down on them, they could say, well, here's the note. We're not to blame. He took full responsibility, so get on his case, not ours. All ass coverage. That's all they care about. They know it has nothing to do with your health or safety. Oh, does it ever not have anything to do with that? So they'll play this game knowing full well that you getting those shots can make you, deathly ill or even kill you. They don't give a shit. Government doesn't care. These institutions don't care. It's all window dressing so everything looks good on paper. In the meantime, people are getting sick. People are dying. And they're creating the illusion that it's A-OK. I love it when they tell you that there's no risk getting this shot. You don't have to worry. But yet they'll have you sign a disclaimer form that if something happens to you, they're not liable. Jesus Christ almighty. You got to love that one. And yet people still sign it. Oh, okay. Where's the dotted line? This is friggin' Twilight Zone material. Anyway, so that concludes that discussion. But, is the public ever going to wake up to these friggin' shenanigans? Probably not. You get a few here, a few there. But overall, nope. People are just sound asleep. And they want to be. They really do. Most people, you try to wake them up, they actually get pissed off at you, which tells me that they must know it's true, but just don't want to hear it. They're living in denial. Why else would they get pissed off? If they didn't think it was true, they'd just say, oh, that's so silly. You're paranoid. Oh, come on now. They wouldn't get mad at you. to get mad says they just don't want to hear it. Shut up. I know it's true, but I want to live in a fantasy world. I want to live in denial. You're wrecking my little comfort zone, my artificial comfort zone. It's going to come back and bite me in the ass later, but it makes me feel good right now. So shut up. Don't remind me that I'm living in denial. It's not just that they're being lied to. They're actually lying to their own selves. You see, these bastards know how human psychology works. They know that once they got you under their delusion, they don't have to even say anything or do anything anymore to buttress that delusion. They know that you're going to do it yourself. Just like religion. Once you fall for the religious bullshit and the religious bullshit book and the religious bullshit deity, once you're, sunk into that, once they got their claws dug into your skull, they don't have to do anything else from there. You'll do it yourself. You'll censor your own self. You'll buttress the delusion yourself. It's amazing. Once they got their hooks in you, they don't have to do anything from there. You will do it all on your own because the programming is already in place. Absolutely incredible. They don't have to say, Simon says. You're going to wave your right arm right in tandem with everybody else. The groupthink mentality. They've got pretty much the entire country into that groupthink mentality. Not just when it comes to believing the bullshit about the immunization shots and the bullshit about 9/11, the bullshit about Sandy Hook. Just people's general attitude today. I've often asked, friends, what's going on with people? Nobody seems to have any compassion for their fellow human being anymore. And it's all about me, hooray for me. How do they get an entire country to become like this simultaneously? Did everybody go to the same asshole university and get the same degree in assholeology? It's amazing. Nobody went to a class where they actually sat down and told you how to be an asshole. It just seems to come natural. Most people are brazen assholes today. Is it the media, the movies, the TV shows? Is it the Prozac and the Ritalin? I think it's a combination of the two. Pharmaceuticals and the bullshit propaganda. Well, that's what Bertrand Russell said, isn't it? People would be told that, people will believe that they're happy because the government will tell them that they're happy. The government, governments in the future, he said, will be able to exert total control over their populations. This will be accomplished, he said, through the use of pharmacological products and propaganda. And there you go. Here we are. Propaganda, bullshit in the media, not just the news media, the entertainment media, probably more so that than the news media. People just emulate what they see on the big screen or the small screen. Whatever they see on TV, whatever they see in the movies, they just emulate it. So when they see people being assholes and they glorify that and make it look funny and attractive, they just become that themselves. And then that is reinforced by the doping up of the pharmaceutical industry. Shit, man, what do you got? Almost, as of a few years ago, it was 1/3 of all adults and children on frickin' psychotropic meds, those, various pharmaceuticals. Now I think it's approaching half. That's frightening. All right, guys, have a great weekend. Catch you on Monday. Take care.